US government is saying that yes, something is definitely going on. According to the government, multiple unknown physical objects have been picked up by various military sensors between the years 2004 and 2021. These objects have been locked onto by the military's most advanced fighter aircraft and weapons systems. We know that the weapon systems and target acquisition avionics in F-22s, F-35s, and even late model F-16s are classified, so their true capability is unknown. However, it's been said that an F-22 can lock onto a bird from 30 miles away while traveling over 1,000 miles per hour. And what the government is reporting is that their most advanced classified systems have locked onto objects that defy the laws of physics. Objects that achieve speeds unfathomable by our standards. Objects that seem to blink in and out of existence. And many other military sensors have picked these things up as well. It's not just aircraft. They've been tracked around US Navy vessels most frequently, as well as high security areas that include nuclear weapon storage. And at least publicly, the US military is claiming that these things are a national security threat and is requesting more money so they can get more data. However, what goes on behind the scenes, especially around topics like this, is anybody's guess. Now, let's just let this all sink in for a second. The US government is admitting that UFOs are not only real physical objects, but also pose a national security risk. This is not just science fiction anymore. These things are as real as can be. But what does it mean for us? You see, this channel has been going over the UFO phenomenon for quite some time. And what you're about to see is all of my UFO content consolidated and edited into one ultimate guide to UFOs. So please share this video to anybody who has questions on the subject, because it might just be the difference between life and death. After all these years, it finally happened. The US government has come out saying that they've recovered, quote, off-world vehicles not made of this earth. This top-secret Pentagon report is said to confirm everything UFO researchers have been saying for years. The Roswell crash, Bob Lazar, Area 51 and Skinwalker Ranch, all confirmed by actual declassified US government documents. But why now? Why is the government releasing all this info right now? The world is on the brink of chaos. We have COVID-19, riots in multiple cities across America, growing civil unrest, and some say we're on the brink of a new civil war. So why the sudden rush towards UFO disclosure? Well, it's simple really, and former President Ronald Reagan has the answer to this question.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
In order to understand what's happening in regards to UFO disclosure and the admission by the government that they've recovered craft not made of this earth, you need to look at the Bible. The Bible is 100% clear on this matter, and it proves that these UFOs are not piloted by so-called space aliens, but rather what we would call fallen angels. In fact, the Bible talks about a great end times deception involving UFOs, but we'll get into that a little later in this video. Right now, we're going to take a look at some of the latest articles coming out on this matter. On July 23, 2020, Tucker Carlson shocked the world when he said this on his live Fox News broadcast.
This is a Fox News alert. There are new findings tonight in the search for extraterrestrial life. The New York Times reporting that a secretive Pentagon unit tasked with investigating UFO sightings is quite likely releasing some of its findings soon, and those findings could be stunning, particularly for people who have doubted the existence. The Pentagon has been conducting classified hearings on UFOs for more than a decade. We know very little about what they've found, but apparently just recovered are off-world vehicles not made on this earth. That's a direct quote.
The following day, multiple articles were released, going into more detail. The Intelligencer reports on July 24, 2020, quote, the Pentagon has reportedly found off-world vehicles not made of this earth. Also, Fox News releases an article entitled, quote, with Pentagon UFO unit in the spotlight, reports mention off-world vehicles not made of this earth. Let's take a closer look at this Fox News article. Quote, a long-hidden UFO investigative unit within the Pentagon will make some of its findings public, according to the New York Times report. The unit, which is now part of the Office of Naval Intelligence, has spent over a decade discussing mysterious events in classified briefings. According to the news outlet, a government contractor told the Times that he gave a classified briefing to the Department of Defense in March describing retrievals from, quote, off-world vehicles not made of this earth. The Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon Task Force at the Office of Naval Intelligence was described in a Senate Intelligence Committee report last month. The unit standardizes collection and reporting on unidentified aerial phenomenon, any links they have to adversarial foreign governments, and the threat they pose to U.S. military assets and installations, the report says. However, the committee remains concerned that there is no unified, comprehensive process within the federal government for collecting and analyzing intelligence on unidentified aerial phenomena, despite the potential threat, it added. The New York Times reports that a small group of government officials and scientists believe that objects of, quote, undetermined origin have crashed to Earth and been retrieved, including former Senator Harry Reid. While some have been found to be man-made materials, there are question marks over others. The publication cites Eric W. Davis, an astrophysicist who worked as a subcontractor and a consultant for the Pentagon UFO program. Davis, who now works for defense contractor Aerospace Corporation, said he also gave briefings on the recovery of unexplained objects to staff members of the Senate Armed Services Committee and the Senate Intelligence Committee on October 21st and October 23rd, 2019, respectively. The article goes on to say, in speaking with the New York Times, Reid said he believes the government and the private sector may have retrieved materials from unidentified objects. After looking into this, I came to the conclusion that there were reports. Some were substantive, some not so substantive, that there were actual materials that the government and the private sector had in their possession, Reid said in an interview. Reid's comments are the latest from the former lawmaker. In June 2019, he told Nevada's KNPR that he wished lawmakers would hold public hearings into what the military knows. He said they would be surprised how the American public would accept it, Reid said during the wide-ranging interview. Why do you think they're so confident people will accept it? Could it have anything to do with the inundation of propaganda material such as ancient aliens and the like? Now, for those of you who are unaware, there is a man named Bob Lazar who claimed that he worked in a secret government facility named S4, and his job was to try and reverse engineer these off-world vehicles and try and figure out how they worked. There was a decades-long drama surrounding Bob Lazar and his story, but many independent investigators and journalists have concluded that yes, he is telling the truth. Recently, Bob Lazar was interviewed on the popular Joe Rogan Experience podcast, and he said something that would go on to send shockwaves through the UFO community.
At least one of them was part of an archaeological dig. So it's old. At least one of them is old. I don't know if it was the one I worked on, but I remember something to do with an archaeological dig. That means it's not just old, it's ancient.
So Bob Lazar is claiming that at least one of the 9 off-world vehicles was found in an archaeological dig. Interesting. The Bible tells us about a time like this, a time long ago filled with high technology, genetic manipulation, sorcery, and wickedness. We refer to this time as the antediluvian era, or the time before the flood of Noah, which also coincides with the New Age teachings of Atlantis. Christian author G.H. Pember wrote extensively about this in his book entitled Earth's Earliest Ages. Timothy Alberino does a good job at breaking this book down in his Alberino analysis. Here is a clip of that video.
Concerning the days of Noah, Pember has much to say. He believed that the very same vices that led to the judgment of the great flood in the Second Age were destined to be repeated in the closing chapter of this present age, and so lead to the final judgment that will descend upon the earth in a fury of fire before the coming of the Lord. He takes particular interest in what he terms the eruption of fallen angels into the world of men, as recorded in Genesis 6, which subsequently fomented an explosion of rebellion and wickedness that brought the world to ruin. Pember defines 7 causes of antediluvian corruption and analyzes the extent of their influence in the society of his day. As we review these 7 points, we must keep in mind that they were written in 1876. They may be summed up as follows. a rapid progression in the mechanical arts, and the consequent invention of many devices whereby the hardships of the curse were mitigated, and life was rendered more easy and indulgent. Also a proficiency in the fine arts, which captivated the minds of men, and helped to induce an entire oblivion of God. The appearance upon the earth of beings from the principality of the air, and their unlawful intercourse with the human race. It should be abundantly apparent to any rational mind that these 7 causes of antediluvian corruption are not only present in the society of the 21st century, but have greatly metastasized and grown to full maturity since the late 19th century, when Pember first recognized them in the dawn of their infancy. In other words, although these 7 points accurately describe the days in which George Pember lived, they are frighteningly more relevant to the days in which we now live, portending the imminence of the final judgment and destruction of this world, and the return of the King.
Now, Jesus Christ himself warned us about this when he said in Matthew 24:37, quote, "But as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be." Are we living in the days of Noah 2.0? I believe the answer to that is yes, and this UFO disclosure is just the tip of the iceberg. Alright, let's continue on. In order to understand the next piece of this puzzle, we need to take a look at Skinwalker Ranch and the Defense Intelligence Agency's secret program named Advanced Aerospace Weapons Systems Applications Program, or OSAP. By the way, I have a video on Skinwalker Ranch. Please check it out if you haven't seen it already. You can find a link in the description or in the top right corner of the screen. Okay, so back to OSAP. Investigative reporter George Knapp reports that a high-level Pentagon official visited Skinwalker Ranch during the OSAP investigation. While he was there, something strange happened to him. He had an experience. Upon further investigation, the Pentagon actually came to the conclusion that what was happening there was demonic in nature. Here is George Knapp telling the story in his own words.
The Skinwalker story comes to the attention of the Defense Intelligence Agency. The scientist who sees it, he goes to Bigelow, they go visit the property. He has an experience. Something appears inside a house that only he can see. He doesn't say anything about it. He goes back to Washington, meets with Harry Reid in the Capitol and 2 other U.S. senators. He presents them a study of UFOs and related phenomena, not just like ATIP, looking at flying saucers that encounter U.S. military, but something more expansive. They put out a contract. Bigelow creates an organization called BASS, puts together a team of experts, 50 or 60 employees, looking at whether there are connections between flying saucers, possible aliens, and all these other different phenomena. The program goes on for a couple of years and somebody yanks the funding. The reason that the DIA suddenly became worried about all this weirdness that was being reported at Skinwalkers because they thought it was demonic. And they thought we might be invoking Satan in here. These were fundamentalist Christians in the Pentagon who pulled the money because they thought it was the devil.
They pulled the money because they thought it was the devil. You see, the Bible talks about this end times deception, where demonic entities will trick mankind into believing that they are space aliens coming down upon the earth. Luke 21:26, quote, "Men's hearts failing them for fear, and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. For the powers of heaven shall be shaken." Sounds a lot like an alien invasion, doesn't it? Now let's take a look at some clips of some prominent Christian researchers and authors and see what they have to say about this matter.
But I don't believe that there's life elsewhere in the universe. That was. I don't think we've got brothers and sisters on some other planet someplace. I don't hold to that view at all. What's interesting is with the abduction phenomena, it parallels what we see in Scripture. It really does. If these are fallen angels, they have the same properties and the same abilities as the good angels have. And so we see when Peter is in the jail cell, chained to a wall, a good angel appears to him. Peter looks around. He's not sure he's asleep or awake, mind fog. Angel tells him to get up. Peter gets up. His chains fall off of him. Manipulation of space, time, and matter. The jail cell opens up by itself. There's no lock. There's a lock, but there's no key to that. Jail cell opens up. Peter finds himself in the hallway. All the Roman guards are switched off. They're asleep. Roman guards who fall asleep fall on their own swords the next day. Thank you. So Roman guards don't fall asleep. They go outside to the courtyard. The gateway opens up by itself, the huge prison gate. They walk a little bit, the angel disappears. That is exactly the same type of circumstances and dynamics that we see in the alien abduction phenomena. People are switched off, matter is floating through walls, floating through this. It's the same deal. The fallen angels are doing the same stuff that the good angels do, only for very nefarious means. And this abduction phenomena, I've interviewed Dr. Jacobs, and it's nefarious. The ending of this thing, I believe, is incredibly malevolent, very nefarious. It's not good for human beings at all. And I think, as Jacobs believes also, that this abduction phenomena and so-called subsequent breeding program has reached its conclusion.
I think they're real. I think they're absolutely real, and I think that they are a major deception, a major part of deception, though. In the end days, I think that we're going to see out of the skies, we're going to see, because that's where the scripture locates what in the Greek is called cosmic crowders, archon. These beings are there. And part of end-time deception, you see the numbers just off the charts nowadays. So I think they are absolutely real. They are there. They're not what the world thinks they are. When Jesus said that in my Father's house there are many realms, many rooms, that's the word he used. So I think it is dimensional. Whether it's layered or just multi, that I don't know. But I think there's realms different than ours, and they're just beyond us or around us. But I think that they're realities also. And I think that's where we're seeing things coming through to our side from those other realms. We need to understand them as the Spirit of God reveals them in the original Greek, cosmocrator, archon, exousia. These beings were different in species or type. I mean, they're all the same in nature, but they are huge in the sense of, in comparison to humanity. They're a superhuman. They're beyond us. So when I think in terms of us contacting them, like we deal with deliverance, there has to be a doorway for them to get over. If this is kind of the wall between the worlds here, and they're wanting to get over, and biblically we know this in dealing with deliverance, they want to get over to this side. There's no question. So the issue is, how do they come through the barrier? How do they come physically through, or to where they're manifesting through? So I believe that means there has to be a gateway, doorway, portal. A Greek word used is topon, a legal access, but the idea also of a way. So I think that on this side of the fence, if we have learned what I believe would be given by them occult means, whether that's psychic meditations, ritual summonings, sacred tones, whatever the method in calling across through this barrier, that is a call, that is a summoning. We as believers in Christ, we call on the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. We read in Psalm 68, summon your power, O God. So the laws of engagement are the same when it comes to the dark side. Now here's the biggest issue I have with the dark side. It's all absolutely real. They're more than they're more than we can even imagine. But the other Greek word I want to always emphasize is metaskizmazo. The word that says when Satan's able to masquerade, transfigure as an angel of light. That's the physics of the dark side. Literally to be able to morph their appearance without changing their nature.
Well, UFOs are obviously unidentified flying objects. Some are man-made, some are from some other source. The popular concept is that a UFO is an alien spacecraft piloted by aliens from some other world, some other star system. I personally don't believe that, having worked in a project with Dr. Edward Teller. The UFOs we're seeing today are primarily all satanic vehicles, and we have built a number of these underground and underwater, undersea bases for these fallen ones, and we were getting our technology from them, and we were letting them do genetic experiments on humans and animals here. In the late 70s, just after I left the organization, in the late 70s, we were kicked out. Humans were kicked out of our own bases by these alleged aliens. They had us build infrastructure to build technologies that they needed in a war that's coming, are going to finish anyway, against Jesus, Yeshua.
I think the evidence points to only one thing, that these so-called space aliens are not from space at all, but rather they're fallen angels who live in another dimension, and they will stop at nothing trying to convince mankind that they are saviors of this world and we should follow their lead at all costs. Well, Sorry to break it to them, but there is only one Savior, and his name is Jesus Christ.
Not human, get it? Something non-human, but intelligent. A non-terrestrial intelligence.
Do you believe in aliens? Extraterrestrial beings? For those of us who read the Bible, it's clear. Extraterrestrial beings not only exist, but they've been here since the very beginning, since before the earth was made. The book of Job, chapter 38, verse 4 through 7, quote, "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched out the line upon it? To what were its foundations fastened? Or who laid its cornerstone when all the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy?" End quote. What this verse is saying is that when the earth was created, there was a race of beings called morning stars, or sons of God, who sang together and shouted for joy after God created it. Quote, "We may deduce two logical conclusions from these verses. First, that they are not referring to literal stars, but the sentient sons of God. And second, that these sons of God are older than the earth itself, since they were present to witness the primordial foundation. The motif of the morning stars and biblical parlance is meant to convey pre-existence and preeminence. In John's revelation, Jesus declares, quote, "I am the root and the offspring of David, the bright and morning star." While writing to the brethren in Colossae, Paul affirms the preeminence of Christ, quote, "He is the head of the body, the church, who is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in all things he may have the preeminence. As the firstborn, not only from the dead, but over all creation. Jesus is the original morning star and the preeminent Son of God. The morning stars and sons of God are children of dawn, the second born in the family of God. They represent an elder race of beings that are both pre-existent and preeminent in relationship to all others, save the Son of God himself, the first and foremost over all creation." End quote. An elder race of beings, otherwise known as angels. They were there to witness God creating the earth, and by their very definition, they're extraterrestrials. Now, we know that angels can look like people. There are instances all throughout the Bible that prove this point. The most famous one being in Hebrews chapter 13, verse 2. Quote, "Be not forgetful to entertain strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unaware." So angels can look like humans, act like humans, sound like humans, and pretend to be humans, but deep down, they are far from human. Let's not forget that Lucifer himself is an angel, and when he fell from heaven, he took 1/3 of the angels with him. 1/3, or 33.3%. 33. Where have we seen that number before? Is it possible that the Masonic obsession with the number 33 is in fact a way for them to pay homage to the 33% of angels that fell from heaven? I say yes, but I digress. December 8th, 2020. The Jerusalem Post releases an article entitled, quote, "Former Israeli space security chief says aliens exist. Humanity is not ready." Let's read it together and see what we can find. Every time this article says the word alien, I'm going to replace it with fallen angel, because that's exactly what they are. Quote, "This galactic federation has supposedly been in contact with Israel and the US for years, but are keeping themselves a secret to prevent hysteria until humanity is ready." This article is by Aaron Reich, December 8th, 2020. Has the state of Israel made contact with fallen angels? According to retired Israeli general and current professor Hayam Eshid, the answer is yes, but this has been kept a secret because, quote, "humanity isn't ready." Speaking in an interview, Eshid, who served as head of Israel's space security program for nearly 30 years and is a 3-time recipient of the Israeli Security Award, explained that Israel and the US have both been dealing with fallen angels for years, with Eshid clarifying the existence of a, quote, "galactic federation." The Galactic Federation. In New Age theology, there is a group of so-called, quote, "good aliens" who call themselves the Galactic Federation of Light, or the Ashtar Command. They've been making contact with psychics and channelers for decades now, and their message is always the same. It's in direct opposition to the gospel of Jesus Christ. You see, it's the same exact lie Lucifer told Eve in the Garden of Eden. It's their calling card, and they always resort back to this promise of, "Ye shall be as gods." In my opinion, this is a soft disclosure. They're trying to warm people up to the idea of some space brothers and sisters who are looking out for humanity, but we know that's not true. We know they're fallen angel entities who are intent on deceiving mankind.
Very mysterious, shiny lights have police and residents puzzled.
This pilot who flew Barack Obama says UFOs are real and he's seen one firsthand.
The triangular-shaped flashing object appears to be floating above the capital city.
So this large disc,
oh yeah,
massive, it was following you.
It was pacing us. Here's this giant red ball just above the clouds.
Unbelievable.
Oh, it was.
Four different species, at least, had been visiting this planet for thousands of years.
What you really need to do to get a handle on the UFO thing, strangely enough, is to do your homework in Genesis chapter 6. And I want you to notice the first two verses, and I want you to pay attention that the first two verses are a single sentence. Many people stumble because they don't realize that's a single sentence. I'll see what I'm getting at in a minute. Genesis 6, verse 1. And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the Benai Elohim, the sons of God, as it's translated, saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. One verse. Now the question is, this strange phrase, sons of God, that can mean anything to us. Let's find out what the text really means, sons of God. What it is in the Hebrew is, remember, Hebrew goes from right to left, so if you're watching the slides here, remember all languages go towards Jerusalem. Nations that are east of Jerusalem go from right to left, the language. Nations that are west of Jerusalem go from left to right. So just breaking, so Hebrew, Aramaic, Arabic, Sanskrit, whatever, they go right to left. Anyway, so if you're reading the Hebrew here, recognize it goes from right to left. Benai Ha Elohim, the sons of the God. Now, sons of God, Benai Ha Elohim is a term that's always used of a direct creation of God. Adam was a direct creation of God. You and I, in the natural, are not. We're sons of Adam. That's our problem. That's what the book of Romans is all about. And but as many as received him, to them gave he the power to become the sons of God. The term has technical meaning in the New Testament as well as the Old. In the Old Testament, this term in the Hebrew, in Job 1:6, Job 2:1, Job 38:7, is always used of angels, because they are a direct creation of God. In the New Testament, also, Luke 20:36. Also, the book of Enoch. Now, don't misunderstand my use of this as a citation here. The book of Enoch was very popular from about the 2nd century before Christ to the 2nd century after. It is not an inspired book. I wouldn't treat it that way, but it is useful in understanding the vocabulary and the grammar of the time. And clearly in the book of Enoch, this term is used there also to refer to angels, and it deals with it greatly. The Septuagint, and the Septuagint also makes it clear that we're dealing here with angels, as we think of them. Now in Genesis 6, it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all whom they chose. The word sons of God, of course, is Benai Ha Elohim, sons of God, direct creation, term for angels. Saw the daughters of men. Now, by the way, what that really says in the Hebrew is Banath Adam, daughters of Adam. Now, when you get down to verse 4 of Genesis 6, it says there were Nephilim in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became the mighty men which were of old, men of renown. What this verse seems to indicate is that these Nephilim were offspring of a strange union. The sons of God, these are angels according to the Hebrew precision here. They came in unto the daughters of men.
Daughters of Adam, incidentally. This is not just Cain and Seth and any of that. This is the daughter. These are daughters of men. And they bear children to them. It's those children that are the Nephilim. Now, what on earth is the Nephilim? That word, Nephilim, is a key word. We're going to talk a lot about that. Nephilim means the fallen ones. It comes from the verb nephal, which means to fall, be cast down, to fall away, to desert. That's what a Nephilim is, a deserter, in a sense. What the passage portrays, and it's very difficult for many people to absorb this, it portrays fallen angels. These are not the good guys. Remember when Satan fell, a third of the angels fell with him. Not all of them, but a group of them, apparently, and we'll talk more about this in a minute, chose to try to create a hybrid race by I don't know the technology. I'm not going to get into that, but they apparently see, angels can't multiply. Angels are eternal. Reproduction is a process for mortals. But at the same time, Satan's got a problem. A third of the angels fell with him, so he's got a deficiency of 2 to 1 in any war that comes in, right? He's got to find a way to strengthen himself. This is just a conjecture that floats around. Now, the offspring are Nephilim. They're also called the Hagibarim, the mighty ones. And now, where the confusion starts to set in is when this Hebrew passage was translated into the Greek in the Septuagint, the word they used for the Nephilim was gigantes. It sounds like giants. And it turns out they were giants, but that's not what the word means. Gigantes comes from gigas, which means earthborn. So in the Hebrew, they're called the fallen ones. In the Greek, they're called the earthborn. And so let's keep that in mind. The fact that they were giants is like a pun. Yes, they were giants, but that's not what the word means. It carries a different meaning. Let's go on a little further in verse 9 of Genesis 6. It says, these are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. Terrific verse. We've all read it. But most of us may not pay attention to what that's really saying. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations. What does that mean? Well, the word perfect in the Hebrew is tamim. What it means is without blemish, sound, healthful, without spot, unimpaired. What that verse seems to indicate is that Noah's genealogy was unblemished. Now this comes on right after the verses that talk about these strange goings on, where these fallen angels have created some weird form of hybrid, but Noah was unblemished in his generations, and that's one of the reasons that God chose Noah and his 3 sons and their 4 wives to start over again. The purpose of the flood was not just that there was sin in the land. There was, and that's emphasized. But if sin brings the flood, we better get some life jackets. No, there's something far deeper going on. That's what I want to sensitize you for when you do your own study and come to your own conclusions. But I want you to recognize there's something much more profound that God, as a problem that God was solving, and that is that Satan's strategy was to contaminate the human race. When you get to the book of Jude, Jude makes an allusion to this very event in Jude verses 6 and 7. Jude is just one chapter, but in verses 6 and 7, Jude writes, and the angels, and by the way, this is in the Greek, so it's not ambiguous, and the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of that great day, even as Sodom and Gomorrah, and the cities about them in like manner giving themselves over to fornication and going after strange flesh, are set forth for an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. Jude is talking about judgment on the bad guys. And he mentions among these things, these angels which sinned back in Genesis 6. These angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains. These angels that participated in Genesis 6 apparently are chained, awaiting a special judgment. We'll talk. Peter's going to talk about that in a minute. And Jude adds something else here. he makes a comparison between the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah and the sins of these angels, in that they were doing that which is unnatural. Even as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities about them in like manner, giving themselves over to fornication and going after strange flesh, are set forth an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. He's using that as an additional exemplar, lumping the angels with him. The angels went after strange flesh, so did Sodom and Gomorrah. They're both reserved for special judgment. You follow me? You can read it and check it out yourself. That's one confirmation. That's in Jude. Let's take a look at, see, they left their own habitation. We're going to come back to that in a minute. And going after strange flesh is the allusion here. Let's turn to 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 4 and 5. 2 Peter, in Peter's second letter, he says, "For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to Tartarus," it's translated hell in your English Bible, but the Greek word is Tartarus, and it's the only place that word appears in the Bible. I'll come back to that. "If God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to Tartarus, and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah," and he goes on. So Peter does a couple of things here. He again alludes to the angels that sinned. They're cast into Tartarus. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. And they're reserved for a final judgment. "And spared not the old world, but saved Noah." In other words, he ties that event to the days of Noah. So he not only confirms Genesis 6, but he also links it to the days of Noah. Okay. The word Tartarus deserves some comment. The problem with this word is it doesn't appear anywhere else in the Bible, but it does appear in Greek literature. It's the Greek term for the dark abode of woe. It is the pit of darkness in the unseen world. It shows up, for example, in Homer's Iliad, where Tartarus is as far below Hades as the earth is below heaven. So where's Tartarus? I don't know, and I don't want to find out. So Tartarus was a term for a deep, special, it was regarded as far below Hades as the earth is below heaven. So it's where these angels are chained until the final thing. Now, if you study classic Greek mythology, you run into the Titans. These creatures in the legends and the myths were partly terrestrial and partly celestial. They rebelled against their father Uranus, and after a prolonged contest were defeated by Zeus and condemned where? Into Tartarus. Do you see a parallel brewing here? I'm going to suggest to you that the legends of the ancient Greeks embody the truth of what really happened in the past, that there were these strange creatures generating hybrids that the Greek called Titans. And we see Zeus in many forms. We see Atlas and Hercules. Atlas and Hercules from Greek mythology were what would be called in the Hebrew Nephilim, offspring of an intermarriage between a god and a woman. And so now these legends we obviously see in the Sumer culture, in Assyria, in Egypt. I'll show you a few things. In the Incas, the Mayan, the Epic of Gilgamesh, in the Persian mythology, and certainly in the Greek mythology, which most of us as products of Western civilization are familiar with. Also in India, Bolivia, South Sea Islands. Every one of these cultures, and the American Indians, every one of these cultures have legends of the star people. These people that came, these gods or demigods, whatever, came and cohabited with women and produced hybrids. I discover from some apparent experts in the American Indian culture that this business of holding a hand up saying how, that's Hollywood. But what apparently was the practice when they met a stranger was to hold up the hand so they could count fingers. They had a terror of the six-fingered people. And if you go to the ruins at Chaca, New Mexico, they have one of the exhibits there that you want to take a look at, with famous pictographs. And among those pictographs, you'll find the fearsome six-fingered hand as part of that. I came across something else that's kind of, the Pawnee Indians have an account that Bill, you remember Buffalo Bill, real name is William Cody. He wrote his autobiography in 1920, very colorful guy. You can get his book, it's popular. But there's an interesting quote in his book by Buffalo Bill, Bill Cody, published in 1920. He says, while we were in the Sandhills scouting the Niobrara country, the Pawnee Indians brought into camp some very large bones, one of which the surgeon of the expedition pronounced to be the thigh bone of a human being. The Indians said the bones were those of a race of people who long ago had lived in that country. They said these people were 3 times the size of a man of the present day. And they were so swift and strong that they could run by the side of a buffalo, and taking the animal in one arm could tear off a leg and eat it as they ran. I don't know what to make of that. It's in his autobiography. It's published in 1920. I don't think he was worried about UFOs and stuff, but it is a interesting allusion to the Indian legends. In the early country, Ashur, they always speak of the flying god of Ashur. And this diagram you see in many, many of the ancient monuments of a man with a bow, like Nimrod perhaps, and the wings. And you see this on the monuments. Here's an example of them. As you go through Egypt, this is a snapshot in one of the tombs of, I think it's Ramesses II, but you see in all of them. You'll notice on the headers of these passages, again you see a flying disc, again and again and again, as you go through Egypt. You look at the headers on many of these monuments. You look up there and you always see the flying disc, sometimes with a snake involved. And you see it again and again and again. Sometimes you see a person involved with these, and you even find the disc being transported from place to place. So this seems to be something more than simply a symbol of some icon that they're worshiping. The point I want to get across, it startled me to realize that this is not simply a study in Old Testament ancient history. It is essential to understand, if you're going to understand your Bible, understand prophecy. You need to understand there were Nephilim after the flood. In Genesis 4, it says there were Nephilim in those days, and also after that. It even hints at it right there. In Genesis 14 and 15, we discover there are 4 tribes at least, the Rephaim, the Emim, the Harim, and the Zamzumim, that Joshua was instructed to wipe out every man, woman, and child. Boy, that sounds like genocide. It was, because we had the same thing, not a flood this time, it was a local situation. And Arba, Anak, and his 7 sons, the Anakim, are talked about not just in the Bible, but also in Egypt, by the way. They were encountered in Canaan, Numbers 13:33, when the 12 spies went. When they came back, that Joshua and Caleb had the good report. The other 10 guys said, hey, there's Nephilim in the land. That's the word they used. They were giants. We are like grasshoppers in their sight. That's not an exaggeration. They had reason to be terrified. Obviously, Joshua and Caleb had faith in God. We're, God's on our side, let's go. But and it's easy to disparage the other 10 guys. You need to understand they had, on the one hand, some reason to be cautious. In Deuteronomy 3 and Joshua 12, we encounter Og, the king of Bashan. He's the king of the giants, the Rephaim. Goliath, remember, he had 4 brothers. That's why David picked up 5 stones when he crossed the brook. Why? He was ready for all 5 of those guys. By the way, what does the Golan Heights, Hebron, and the Gaza Strip have in common? They're in the news day all the time, right? These are the areas that Joshua failed to exterminate the Rephaim. The word Rephaim means the dead, the walking dead. Isaiah 26:14 says they cannot be resurrected. These are strange creatures. And it's interesting, if you study the strongholds that they failed to defeat, you'll notice that those same regions are the territories, the so-called West Bank, that are in dispute today. I think that's fascinating. Not Joshua, but his descendants failed to deal with these issues, and they plague them to this very day. The Golan was called Bashan, and it's just, when Jesus is hanging on the cross, in Psalm 22, verse 12, he says a strange thing. He says, many bulls have compassed me, strong bulls of Bashan have beset me round. I have no idea what that means, but I suspect he's not talking about cattle. I think he's talking about some kind of demon oppression that's involved. I think it's an allusion to the Rephaim. Let's talk a little bit about the nature of angels, because that's really at the root of this problem. You notice, we learn a lot about angels by looking at the Bible. They always appear in human form. They look human. In fact, many people entertain them unawares, we find out. Sodom and Gomorrah, the homosexuals were after them. That tells you something. I don't want to be too graphic here. And at the resurrection and at the ascension, there's always a pair of angels. And they're like men. They look like men standing there. They spoke. They took men by the hand. They ate meals with them. They're capable of direct physical combat. The Passover in Egypt was by a death angel. In the book of 2 Kings, slaughter of the 185,000 Syrians. One angel after night slaughters 185,000 Syrians. You don't mess around with angels. Now, and they don't marry in heaven. Now that's a phrase. By the way, I'm making a contrast here. With the demons of the New Testament are not like this. They apparently are powerless except to the extent they can embody some person. They're not like angels. Don't distinguish between fallen angels, the bad guys, and the demons. The demons apparently are disembodied spirits looking for embodiment. The angels don't have that problem. They apparently can materialize. All the way through the scripture we see them that way. We do know they don't marry. Because the question everybody has is, can angels have sex? The scripture says no. No, it doesn't say that. Jesus says, for in the resurrection, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are as the angels of God. He's talking about that in a resurrection bodies, we don't have sex because we're immortal. There is no procreation. There is no reproduction issue. And angels, he's talking here about the angels of God in heaven. I would not speculate on the technologies available to an angel who falls. And that's what we're really dealing with here. Now, there's a strange word that gets overlooked by the scholars in general, and I've participated in some translation issues on this very issue. There's a word called okaterion, and it refers to the body as the dwelling place for the spirit. It only occurs twice in the scripture, and it's very interesting where it does. It occurs in Jude 6, and it's the word that describes what the fallen angels disrobed from. And in 2 Corinthians 5:2, it speaks of, it alludes to the heavenly body that you and I as believers aspire to be clothed in. Same word, okaterion. I think it's a technical term that's overlooked by the scholars. In Jude 6 and 7, it says, when the angels which kept not their first estate left their own habitation, that word habitation is okaterion. They disrobed from the body that they were given to indulge in this mischief in Genesis 6. The angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness in the judgment of that great day. Even as Sodom and Gomorrah and so on. We went through that before. The word is okaterion. In 2 Corinthians 5, 1 and 2, Paul tells the Corinthians, for we know that if our earthly house of this tabernacle were dissolved, we have a building of God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. And for this we groan, earnestly desiring to be clothed upon with our house which is from heaven. The word translated house is okaterion. That which those angels abandon is what we aspire to, that kind of a habit, if you will. Okaterion again. Well, let's move on. The coming to cosmic deception, what's the biggest lie of all? You know, it's interesting. This all started back in Genesis 3. When God declared war on Satan, he says, I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed, and he shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. And from this verse, we get one of the messianic titles of Christ, the seed of the woman. What many people overlook, there's two seeds mentioned here. The other seed is the seed of the serpent. And so we have the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. And the seed of the serpent, we find all kinds of idioms, the red dragon in Revelation 12, the coming world leader, as I sometimes call him, the false prophet in Revelation 13. These forces are still at work and behind the world powers today. Check out Daniel 10 and really understand what's going on there. All of us have studied Daniel 2 and the sequence of nations, or empires, I should say, that were re-echoed in Daniel 7, the winged lion, bear on one side, the leopard, the terrible beast, the 10 heads. Again, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome 1 and 2. We've been through that in our prophetic studies, and most people recognize the iron mixed with clay is the Roman Empire. Don't confuse that with Western Europe. The Roman Empire, part 1 and part 2. Well, we live in a world, what's going on in this world? There's a new world order. A world without borders is the concept. The end of the independent nation state. Multiculturalism is in. Check your faith at the door. We're going to all compromise. And this is all heading for a centralized socialistic government. And there are a couple of forcing functions. Every freedom-loving person considers this an anathema, except the problem is there's no way to avoid it. Nuclear proliferation is part of it. We're on the threshold right now of nuclear war because of this very issue. But there's another forcing function that nobody talks about. The possibility, ultimately, not yet, but coming, of cosmic threat of some kind. You say, Chuck, that's way out. That's fringe stuff. Really? Let's talk about the miry clay. You know, in Daniel's famous vision of the multi-metal image, the last phase was, of course, the iron mixed with clay, the 10 toes. What is miry clay? Miry clay is clay made from mire, or dust, if you will. And everybody talks about the clay in the 10 toes of Daniel's imagery. No one, I'm guilty too, paid any attention to Daniel's explanation of it. In Daniel chapter 2, verse 43, he's explaining the whole thing. He's interpreting the vision for you. When he gets to this, in verse 43, he says, "Whereas thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave to one another," and so on. You know, that phrase, I read that 100 times over the last 30 years and didn't hit me until this in-depth study. The miry clay refers to a they. It's a personal pronoun. They shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. In order to mingle themselves with the seed of men, they have to be something other than the seed of men, or it makes no grammatical or logical sense. So the they that are going to do the mingling are not the seed of men. Oh, could this be a hint of some mischief in the end times analogous to the mischief in Genesis 6? I think so. They shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. Boy, there it stares. Anyway, but the coming great deception, Jesus opens and closes his Matthew 24 thing. He says, "There shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch that if it were possible, they should deceive the very elect." What's going to protect you? Your intellectual background? Your knowledge of physics? No way. No way. If it were possible, they would deceive the very elect. The only thing that can save you from this deception is your spiritual condition by being in Christ. They shall show great signs and wonders. They're going to do things that are going to violate our apparent knowledge of reality. When we get to 2 Thessalonians, Paul in 2 Thessalonians 2 has a lot to say about this. He says, "The mystery of iniquity doth already work. Only he who now hindereth will hinder until he be taken out of the way. And then shall the wicked one be revealed, whose coming is after the working of Satan, with all power and signs and lying wonders." The wicked one is going to do miracles. Be prepared for some political leader to raise people from the dead. We're not ready for that. The mystery, see, I think the restrainer is restraining far more than you and I have any idea. Now, where does this wicked one come from? It surprises many to realize the Scripture tells us. In Revelation 11 and Revelation 17. Revelation 11, verse 7, "And when they shall have finished their testimony, the beast that ascendeth out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them, and shall overcome them and kill them." Where is this guy coming from? From out of the abuso. So he's not just some political leader that happens to be kind of gifted. No, this guy is empowered by Satan himself. And he's coming out of the abuso himself. You get to Revelation 17. "The beast that thou sawest was and is not, shall ascend out of the bottomless pit, go into perdition, and they that dwell upon the earth shall wonder, whose names are not written in the book of life." The only thing that can protect you from all of this is your position in Christ. 2 Thessalonians goes on, "And because they receive not the love of the truth that they might be saved, for this cause God shall send them strong delusion that they should believe the lie." If you've had an opportunity and turned down the redemption of Christ, this is what it's talking about. Because they receive not the love of the truth that they might be saved, and for this cause God will send them a strong delusion that they should believe the lie. Be careful. Don't play that game. If you're going to accept Christ, do it now. Don't wait.
Why would extraterrestrials fly millions of light years to deny Christianity, support the occult, and lie about things that we know are true? Why would they purposely deceive their contacts? In the old days, they were from Mars, Jupiter. Well, we've been there and tested and looked, and no alien races on those planets. So now they're from further off when we can't test their claims. But there's a fundamental problem with that. If they're from Sirius, Zeta Reticuli, or the Pleiades, and they're all claiming they're humankind's creators, they can't all be right. They can't all be telling the truth. So either there's only two possibilities: they're all wrong, or only one of them is correct. But if only one of them is correct, it means everybody else is lying. So how do you discern which one's telling the truth or not? I mean, just on the premise of logic, it gets very, very suspect. One of the ways you can start to get people to doubt is the things that they have shown. You know, as you saw in the movie, all of these secular researchers saying they're deceptive, they lie to people, they're deceptive, they lie to people. But people never questioned it during the experience. Certainly after, when you say, were you told this, and they go, yeah. I said, but that's not true. And that's not true. Doesn't that make you a bit suspicious? I've met literally hundreds of people who've had this one, and that they're lying in bed and they see a black cloud or entity in the room, and it moves or hovers, and they lose control of their voice and they're paralyzed. The skeptics try to, explain it away as sleep paralysis. And people call on the name of Jesus, for example, and even something like that stops. And I myself had that same experience, and I haven't told many people this, as a baby Christian. I think I'd been saved a matter of days. I didn't know anything about spiritual warfare, and I'm lying in my room and I had this experience, but I was so excited about my newfound faith, I managed to squeeze the words out, Jesus help me, and I was being pressed against the bed and choked, and it stopped in an instant. We have testimony after testimony after testimony. And Guy Malone, a researcher in Roswell, New Mexico, he says, well, think about it. If these really are advanced entities flying millions of years across space with that type of technology, why would they be frightened of the name of Jesus, a supposedly deceased religious figure? Joe Jordan, who's catalogued over 400 cases now, has recently, if you like, been promoted. He lives in South Korea as the national director for MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, the world's largest UFO investigative group. He, as a non-believer, first stumbled upon this. And he said, so what is it about Christians that aliens don't like? That was what he thought. And then he realized, like all other researchers who've come to study it, and if they're open enough to take the evidence for what it was, they realize they're not dealing with aliens, they're dealing with spirit beings. And he said he came to understand that the Bible was the only thing that it could explain the spirit realm adequately. Only permanent solution is the authority of the Creator, because if we are talking about fallen angels, deceptive spirit beings, who created them? The Creator of the universe created everything. He's the only one that obviously can have authority over those beings. We're all looking for meaning and purpose in this world, and if an alien's traveled millions of light years across the universe, and I'm not making light of this, but he's come into your room and he says, and I've chosen you, I love you, you're special, you've suddenly found meaning and purpose in life. And that's why it alters people, and that's why often they don't question the experience. They are not benevolent aliens visiting us from a galaxy far, far away. They are deceptive, supernatural entities emanating from another dimension. Any serious expert will tell you that these are what they would describe as interdimensional beings. John Mack, in fact, a Harvard former professor of psychiatry at Harvard University, says that these were beings that should have stayed in the spirit world. He used that term, have crossed over into ours, and he kind of described them as having an intervention with humans or something like that. So that's called the interdimensional hypothesis. It's a physical realm that has the ability to manifest in our limited realm. Maybe can deceive our eyes, it's very powerful. And of course, if that's the case, as I've described, they can physically do things to people. What we find is that it is illusory in nature. This is going to be hard for people to accept. Under a state of hypnosis, memories can be given to you that when you are awakened from that hypnotic state, you cannot distinguish between fact or fantasy. I've seen it demonstrated. For example, they hypnotized a woman and they said, when you were a child, A, B, C happened to you. And then they woke her up. And even in that just few minutes, her imagination, because it was implanted in the subconscious realm, she's already incorporated as a real event. And she will even add to that event and to make it fit, to accommodate it. And even when they told her and said, actually, it didn't really happen to you, we just implanted that a few minutes ago, she goes, no, you didn't. No, that really happened to me. So the big key, I mentioned Bud Hopkins before, is when people have this alleged alien abduction experience, or they're driving their car and they see a light, that's the last thing they remember. And it's something called missing time. Missing time. So they wake up hours later and they look at the dashboard clock in the car and they saw the light at 11 p.m. and it's now 3 a.m. in the morning, and they have no conscious recollection of where that 4 hours went. So they go off to, because the last thing they saw is a UFO or an alien, they think, in their room, they go off to one of these UFO research centers and they get hypnotically regressed. And under hypnosis, they recount allegedly being taken on board a spaceship and all of these events because they were consciously told to forget of them. There's a second problem. Sometimes hypnotists can ask leading questions while you're in a hypnotic state that also can create that as well. And a great exponent of this, in case people think I'm making it up, I mean, this is done for entertainment. On YouTube, people go and watch Derren Brown, a very famous British entertainer, D-E-R-R-E-N, and he actually hypnotizes people. And we're not talking about the watch waving, going to sleep. That's all stage entertainment. But he can actually lay embedded commands and get people to do things that would naturally be against their will. And in one episode, movie-length episode called Assassin, he actually trained a guy through hypnotic suggestion to assassinate the British actor Stephen Fry on stage. And when he heard a bell and a woman walked in front of him in a polka dot dress, the case was there. He picked up the gun, it was blanks, and he shot Stephen Fry on stage. Stephen Fry was part of the scam. He put the gun back in, sat down, and then the bell rang and he woken out of his state. And he's like, what happened? He looked on the stage and Stephen Fry was shot and he was in a panic. And then they said, you shot him. He said, no, I didn't. That'd be ridiculous. And then they showed him the video footage of him actually doing it. If someone talks to you and they tell you lies, then they're a liar. If they tell you stories that you can demonstrably show are not true, then trust is not recommended. And when it comes to the things that these alleged abductees, and of course I don't believe they're abductees, so I prefer to call them experiences, but the things that they're told, we can demonstrably show to be false. And so if they are, again, highly evolved benevolent beings, why are they lying to us? Why are they traumatizing people? Don't they know, if they've been watching this for millions of years, that stealthily abducting you into a spaceship against your will and probing you, and people record incredibly painful experiences they believe they've had? Why don't they know that kind of hurts us? Spirit entities are coming. What they're able to do while people are in a transition state that is going off to sleep and falling out of sleep, the hypnagogic or hypnopompic states, that is when you are most suggestible. You see Derren Brown actually do this in people's bedrooms. And you can implant messages that are not real. And as a result of those, when you awaken, you physically think they're real. This is nothing new, and it's in fact been happening for centuries. So think about a couple of 100 years ago. You know, today, I mean, UFOs, aliens visiting us is pop culture. As I said, it's in sci-fi and every popular TV show. But 200 years ago, people believed in beings called fairies. There were stories of fairies appearing in people's rooms, taking people away to other lands, people having experiences with them, sometimes of a sexual nature, and so on. You go back to the Middle Ages, and there were stories of demons entering people's rooms called the incubus and the succubus, raping men and women, even against their will. So, you know, today, if a fairy stood at the bottom of a being claiming it's a fairy stood at the bottom of someone's bed, you'd say, fairies, that's make-believe. You would doubt your own sanity. 200 years ago, it wasn't a problem because they were popular culture. But today, what's pop culture and people don't question is that little entity at the bottom of their bed is really from a planet far, far away, and they've been chosen and they're special. And so what we're seeing, it's the same old phenomenon that is dressed up in a new, more believable guise or theme that makes it acceptable to the population. They're emanating from the spirit realm, but they're illusory. And what I mean by illusory is in the theme or the meme that they're creating. There can be physical experiences. So the Bible records angels coming into our realm, even God's destroying angel killing the firstborn in Egypt. I mean, how much more dramatic can you get than that? So they can definitely come into our physical realm. Sodom and Gomorrah, they appeared physically, and they talked about the impending destruction that was coming. They looked like men. 3 men sat down with Abraham.
They were 9-10 feet tall entities, and they told him that they were preparing for an intergalactic war with God, and that they were going to win. What happened was they opened up this portal, they created a rift, and entities began to come through. Not just this Whore of Babylon being birthed, but other entities. The federal government at the highest levels have known that these are not space aliens, that these are entities coming from another dimension.
My name is Wes Fall, and I am part of Fall Brothers Productions and Fourth Watch Films with Justin Fall and with Chad Riley. And the Lord just directed our steps into kind of a full circle. We both went to film school, Justin and I did, years ago, and we had to pay bills doing other things, but the Lord brought us back to making films. And so it's been a crazy ride, but I'm just glad to be here and doing what the Lord's called us to do.
My name is Justin Fall, and my background is in film production. I'm a film student from the Art Institute of Atlanta, and I'm also a career researcher. My main focus in life is to be able to wake up the church. I want to be able to better equip the church, and I want them to understand that the times they're going to be coming upon the face of this earth, which we are approaching, no one would deny that crazy prophecies are being fulfilled right now. Things that 100 years ago, the average Christian would not have understood the scripture the way that they would today, based on the unfolding of events that we're seeing. And so as a career researcher, my ministry is all about equipping the saints for the last days, equipping the tribulation saints, even if you want to use that language, but also to join the conversation of the world. I think that Christians need to be able to join the conversation about the paranormal, about the crazy topics. We need to join that conversation and give a biblical answer that will cause the world to want to draw near unto Christ.
We looked at this alien question. You can go back to even the past election in 2016. Hillary was talking about how if she won, she was going to open the vault and get into basically exposing what the UFOs are and the alien question. We wanted to look at it in the biblical aspect of it and to try to break down, what are we dealing with here? Because the world does have this answer, but as we found out, so does the Bible.
Higher Entities, it's a film that deals with a very much political, paranormal conspiracy. We made Higher Entities for a lot of different reasons. The timing of Higher Entities could not have been better because we're dealing with a film that it digs deep into these areas of government alien entity connections. Now, why is that important? Because we're living in a time where we understand that the Antichrist is coming on the face of the earth. There will be an Antichrist. And we know that he has fallen angels that are going to be working with him. He's going to have a demonic army. He's going to have all types of lying signs and wonders. The Bible talks about these lying signs and wonders. And if it were possible, the elect would be deceived by his cunning. I believe the aliens in the last days, which we don't really believe them to be space aliens, and we'll get into that here in a few minutes, but I believe that the alien entities, the higher entities, they will likely use some type of a cataclysmic event, something major, whether it's real or synthetic. We know about Project Bluebeam. Mm-hmm. We know about technology where they can project an image in the sky.
There's going to be things that come upon this earth that are going to cause men's hearts to fail them. And so, like right now, everybody is consumed with this Western civilization of idea of going to work and coming home and watching the ball game and getting married, 2.5 kids, dog and a cat, that whole deal. There's no room for supernaturalism there. But when that does take place, it's going to flip the world on its head. And so I think that this is kind of like we've already seen like a soft disclosure take place. And I think it's prepping the world for that. But even more so, I believe that it's tying into what the Bible says is going to take place. And ultimately, it's going to be pointing the world towards an Antichrist, towards a false prophet promoting that Antichrist. He's going to be able to call fire down from heaven. It's going to be some supernatural feats taking place in the eyes of men. And so if the world doesn't have a supernatural worldview, that's going to give it to them. I think that all this is going to culminate pointing people to this so-called messianic figure that's going to be in the place of Christ. And for the church, the big thing on that end of things is that if they don't have a supernatural worldview, if they see this coming upon the world, if just specifically in Matthew 24, people claiming to be anointed, people claiming to be Messiah, which is just another word for anointed, and underneath that, anointed for an office, they're going to be coming in the name of Jesus. So they get their foot inside the church doors, and they're saying they're anointed, and they're going to be doing crazy lying signs and wonders. And so that would be believing in what they see and what they experience versus having faith in God and His Word.
No, Jesus said that there's coming a time where they're going to say to Him, "Lord, Lord, I did all this good stuff in Your name." The thing that gets my attention there is that he mentioned some specifics, like casting out demons in Your name.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a major denomination right now that they make their big deal on casting out demons. There's a couple of them, actually. There's going to be people that think they're operating in spiritual gifts, yet Jesus is going to say, "I never knew you." Yeah. But what we're talking about with this alien idea, the aliens are going to be giving different types of experiences to people. This is what people have to understand. The experiences have to be tested with Scripture.
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise, we're going to accept them because they're supernatural experiences, whether it's a supernatural healing, whether it's some type of a prophetic event where they speak a word of knowledge or they know something about your history, whatever it may be. The aliens could have a cure for cancer. The aliens. These higher entities are coming from a different place than us. They're not earthborn. The only ones that could be earthborn would be the demons, which came through the line of the Nephilim. And obviously that's a little bit of a different scenario. Mm-hmm. It ties in together. But with higher entities, we're dealing with, there is a group that we tracked in this film called the Collins Elite. And the idea was trying to answer the question, were there events in history where the American government was working with entities? That was kind of the beginning of this research. And if so, what happened? Can we validate this? What came of that? But also, were there factions in the government who stood up against these things? That was the premise of this film. And we started off by talking about a group known as the Collins Elite. Now, let's just go back in time. There was an event that took place back in the late 40s known as the Babylon Working Ritual. Now, this was a ritual that was carried out by Jack Parsons, JPL. People will even to this day say that JPL stands for Jack Parsons Laboratories, but on paper it's Jet Propulsion Laboratories. JPL is major. It's a historic, so much surrounding this, so much history here. Jack Parsons was not professionally trained, yet he was tapping into high technology and building rockets. How do you do that without any type of formal training? There were no rocket programs in America before Jack Parsons. This is paramount to understand. This guy was tapping into theosophy, Thelema, the religion of Aleister Crowley. He was a disciple of Aleister Crowley, and he was working with L. Ron Hubbard, who was the founder of Scientology. Interestingly, not only did L. Ron Hubbard start Scientology, but he was a science fiction writer. Mm-hmm. The movie Battlefield Earth with John Travolta, well, that was written by L. Ron Hubbard. Interestingly also, John Travolta is a Scientologist, right? Now, I mention this because this is a man who writes science fiction, yet he started a religion based on science fiction. There has to be something in there where he's getting these clues and these ideas. He's getting these from another realm.
From that point, they ripped a hole open into space-time. And from that point afterwards, you had, regardless of what Parsons actually successfully completed during that with the Whore of Babylon and different things, after that, you had the Roswell incident. You had the Kenneth Arnold sightings. You had in '53 there was the swarm of UFOs that flew over the White House, and so there's this unleashing of supernatural activity that took place after that ritual was performed.
Babylon Working was successful according to Jack Parsons. Matter of fact, Parsons said in his Antichrist Manifesto that they were successful and that a child was conceived in that act, and that there was a spirit known as Hilarion. The Whore of Babylon was what they were trying to bring about. They believed what we believe, in that America was the final Babylon. Like, this was the revived Babylon. They believed it, and they were occultists. We're Christians, and we believe it. There's evidence to back this up. But yes, let's backtrack just for a second. What happened was they opened up this portal. They created a rift, and entities began to come through. Not just this Whore of Babylon being birthed, but other entities, because people all over the place started having paranormal encounters, and they began to report this to law enforcement, report this to the FBI, report this to whatever agency they could get in touch with. And so the federal agencies said, we've got to come up with an answer for this. We were not prepared for any of this. There's UFO activity. There's talk of entities and demons and winged creatures and just all kinds of weird, just paranormal demonic activity following this ritual that Jack Parsons said finally worked. Wow. They did the ritual for a couple years. It finally worked, finally stuck. And that's what a scientist does. A scientist is going to work at something. He's going to work at the hypothesis until it's proven true or false. Now, finally, the researchers, the government puts together this group that says we're going to get answers to what exactly took place out there in the desert in California by Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard. They go to Jack Parsons. And keep in mind, Jack Parsons is also working with the government. He's now been given, special privileges on things. So they go to him and they say, Jack, all of this stuff that's happening right now, did you do this? Did you do this? And he said, I think so. Now, shortly thereafter, Jack Parsons blows himself up in a lab. Accidental. It was not intentional. The occult belief was that whoever opened up the portal had to close the portal. Well, Jack Parsons is now dead. Wow. And the federal government is now having to understand and depict exactly to the public what's happening here. And so this group is researching, and out of that group, they finally start to make some headway. They know they're dealing with entities. And so in all of that, they began to try to make contact with those entities, maybe for some help, maybe because they're trying to figure out how to close this thing, maybe they're trying to figure out how to undo what Jack Parsons did. So they go through satanic rituals to communicate, because that's the only method of communication that they know that works to contact these entities. In doing this, there's a small faction known as the Collins Elite. This is where our film picks up. The Collins Elite was a small group inside of this larger group that was originally created to get answers to all of this. But once they began to engage in satanic rituals and magic and alchemy, this group says, hey, you know what? This is not what we signed up for. This small group raises up. It's a faction. It's a counterpoint group, which means that they are no longer in agreement with the big group. They have a different opinion. They say, we have a Christian worldview. This goes against our Christian worldview. And so they see that entities are being channeled and communicated with, and now technology is being given through these rituals to these other members of the government. So the Collins Elite says, whoa, this is dangerous. You guys are really playing with fire here. We can't support this. We can't do this. And they came up with this idea that the aliens were going to take over, and that in order to protect our country from the aliens, from the entities, they believed that we needed to instate a forced theocracy based on the law of Moses. Because they thought if our country would go back under the law of Moses, that we would be untouchable from these entities. This group, this bigger group that was researching to get answers, they did not exist. Okay, this was what's known as a limited access program, or an LAP. A limited access program means that nobody in Congress has to know about this.
The Collins Elite were a counterpoint group within different governmental organizations that were party to satanic ritual being used to make contact with these aliens or with these higher entities. And because of their Christian faith, they had the conviction. They saw this taking place, and they're like, well, we don't need to be a part of this. This is what the Bible talks about in the worship of demons and of other gods. And especially being, using blood sacrifice and different types of black magic to be able to accomplish it. So they saw that, and they didn't want to be a part of it. They also were able to tie this back to what Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard did in the desert in the late 40s.
You've got literally just the group, and maybe a director knows about it. Nobody else. It's completely classified. It's top secret. It's under lock and key. But I want to mention something. One of the bombshells that we dropped was that there's a declassified federal document Anyone watching this interview can go find this document. It's on the FBI vault. Document 6751, it's a document from the 40s. It was written by a prominent member of academia, and it was submitted to the FBI. In this document, they make a case that entities are not space aliens, but that they're interdimensional or extra-dimensional entities that are crossing over from a plane known as the ethereal plane. Now, we know, as researchers of the New Age movement, we know that that is where the ascended masters are supposedly said to be on a high level. This ethereal plane is very popular. When you talk to people who astral project, people who channel, people who remote view, people who want to tap in or go on a trip, an ayahuasca trip, a DMT trip.
Ayahuasca, different trips, DMT, that does allow you to cross over, or allows a person to cross over into those dimensions. Outside of that, the satanic ritual has proven to be the most effective, and from the research that we've done, the people that we've interviewed, that seems to be the constant. That's like it's a guarantee you're going to make contact if you do this.
Now, the federal government had this document in the 40s, and language was used in this document that came right out of the playbook of Theosophy. Now, the guy that received this document, this is so crazy. The federal agent receives a document, and look, the FBI is constantly bombarded with phone calls and letters and emails, and they just can't deal with all of the propaganda from citizens. People make stuff up, and it's just it's nothing. It's crying wolf. So the FBI has to really be careful what they accept and what they don't. But this was back in the 40s. So the guy that receives a document, he recognizes that this information was received through paranormal means. As a matter of fact, the language used in the 40s was super normal. That's the old way of saying paranormal, super normal. So he says that all of this information was received through supernormal means, therefore we need to discount it. It's not valid information. Now that's the headline that he put, it's like a cover letter. If he really believed that, why did they classify the document? Why did they classify it and then forward it to all of these FBI prominent members at the highest level of security clearance? Why in the world would they classify it and lock it up if they didn't believe it? It wasn't until years later that they declassified document 6751. And I read this document and I'm thinking, okay, since the 40s, the federal government at the highest levels have known that these are not space aliens, that these are entities coming from another dimension.
In the scripture, you have the chariots that are mentioned, God's transport, basically, and it ripping through the space-time from the spiritual into the natural. I think that's basically the same thing that we're dealing with the UFOs. And because of the different deals that they've made with the governments, with the sharing of their technology, in order for them to have a safe space of being able to do whatever they do in the deep underground military bases. I think that some of the ones that you're seeing today are going to be basically the government taking that information and creating their own spacecraft. The technology that Standea was working on with anti-gravity craft, I think it follows along the same thing. You can go back to the Nazis with the Die Glocke and different things like that they made, which also they were highly involved with the occult. They didn't just wake up one day and say, hey, I'm going to try this, this, and this. There was a basis. They went in there and they performed rituals to get the information to be able to practice that.
When you talk to someone who has worked in a deep underground military base, which we've interviewed people, they talk about different classes of entities. None of that is really mentioned in 6751. It's more so an overall summarization of what's going on. Now, there were some information about traveling through the dimensions. There's some very fascinating tidbits in this document. And we don't really go too deep into the document other than referencing it in the film, because we had to go through, we've got over 300 declassified documents in our collection right now, all pertaining to aliens, UFOs, extrasensory perception, psychic activity that they're training people to operate in. The federal government has been training people in the occult since the 40s. Training them in how to operate in occult magic and occult sciences. Everything our Bible tells us is absolutely forbidden. Our federal government has been a part of this since the 40s. And I want to add, back in the 40s, they still promoted the idea of a Christian nation of America. Yet behind the scenes, it just goes to show that the people in charge of our government have been pacifying the society since the beginning. And I don't understand how people could be so blinded We present the information. This is what they said in the 40s, and it's only gotten worse over the years. Now, let me just draw us into this other area real fast. This group, the Collins Elite, they really wanted to create, how can I put this? They wanted to create some type of resistance. Non-aggressive, of course. Non-aggressive resistance. That's what I understand that from my studies. That's what I believe. They wanted a non-aggressive resistance to what was taking place, because they saw that when a man or a group of men began to communicate with these entities, the hunger for power gets greater and greater and greater, and then you're no longer trying to get answers. You're now wanting to ask them to give you blessings. You're now getting technology and information from these entities, and you're utilizing it in the way that you structure your government moving forward. And you would say, well, why would these entities need the government? It's not a matter of them needing the government. It's a matter of setting up the scene for the end times deception, where the Antichrist is going to unite the governments of the world. It's all part of their long game. They've been working on this since the beginning of time. It didn't work at the Tower of Babel. The Lord ended it quickly. But here we are today. Where are we today, and what happened between then and now? Well, what we find out is that one of our contacts, Stan Deyo, who, by the way, Tom Horn gave us a great endorsement of Stan Deyo. Tom Horn, before his house burned down years ago, he had this big newspaper article from the UK. And standing on the cover with these other elite doctors and scientists, it's Stan Deyo. And they're giving him credit in the UK, public knowledge, that he's working on anti-gravity craft. Now, the film that we did called the Hollow Earth Chronicles, we did a whole segment in that film on Operation High Jump. This was a joint task force between the American government, the British government, and the Australian government, headed by the US and Admiral Byrd. They go down to Antarctica in what turns into a UFO battle. And their big plan got cut in half, and they had to come home early because we lost men, we lost ships. There's stories of UFOs coming up out of the water and just cutting ships in half with laser. I mean, just crazy stuff that you only see in movies. What's fascinating about this is that this was a joint task force with those same three governments that are now working together with Stan Deyo, the British, the American, and the Australians, working together on alien technology yet again, years after Operation High Jump happened. Stan Deyo was working as a secret agent for the FBI in Australia inside of the deep underground military bases. And he said while he was in the program, he knew about the deal with Eisenhower. He knew in the program that President Eisenhower had made a deal with what they called alien entities. I believe that the evidence points to two events taking place, and these two events happened 1 year apart. The first one happened at Edwards Air Force Base, where Eisenhower disappears, and they call it a media blackout. It was kind of similar to when Hillary Clinton and President Obama disappeared and were at the Bilderberg meeting, but nobody knew where they were, and it was called the media blackout. People freaked out, right? Well, something similar happened here, where Eisenhower is no longer on radar, and they come back later and say, oh, well, he had a dental emergency, and so he had to go seek a private dental care. Now, that happened, and then a year later, we have the Holloman Air Force Base event. Now, the thing about the Holloman event was that people were there who witnessed it. Holloman is where they were out on the landing strip, and you had UFOs landing, meeting with him. Meeting took place with Eisenhower and others, and then those UFOs took off. Now, there were eyewitnesses who have come forward. I was just talking about this with Chad Riley because he found some videotapes from the 90s. This is before the internet was doing its thing. In the 90s, there were videos that were recorded, old VHS tapes of some of these disclosure type engagements. I don't know what you want to call it, but these are men that were there. They're decorated men from the government, and they're now speaking out that yes, UFOs were landing and taking off at Holloman Air Force Base, and I believe it was 1955. We do know that things began to be more apparent after Babylon working, and therefore there were more things taking place where there was people seeking the entity. So what I believe happened was that the rift was open, the tear in the space-time continuum, if you will, a portal, Stargate was opened, and the government got involved, the feds got involved. Once they began to communicate with the entities, there was now a relationship being built, and it was no longer shock value that there are these entities who want to work with us. So I think that was definitely an open door, no pun intended, for those entities to now be communicating with President Eisenhower years later, not too many years later, but a few years later. They're now meeting with Eisenhower. And so the story goes like this. We're on the road trip. We're driving out to meet with Ray Boucher, who was contacted by the Department of Defense. This is really important. This is one of those like haymakers. The information that he gives us that he presented his full disclosure in our film Higher Entities. But we're driving there and we're having a discussion. And we decided, let's just go ahead and let's run some cameras, while we're driving and talking. So we set up our production stuff in Darren's SUV. We're driving down the road, and we have this conversation about this Eisenhower deal. See, what I had heard and researched was a little different than what Darren had picked up in his research. And this is one of those scenes in the movie where it's just like, wow, like the stuff that came out was so organic and unbelievable. Apparently, there were two events that happened. And a lot of people blur them. A lot of people will mix it up with the Edwards Air Force Base and the Holloman. They're two separate events a year apart. That's so important. But the idea is that the gray aliens on record met with Eisenhower. And then you had this other group of entities known as like the Tall Whites or the Nordics. They met with Eisenhower separately and they warned him. They said, you do not ever want to make a deal with the gray aliens. They are deceptive. They are very deceptive. All they want to do is deceive you and enslave you. They're demonic, basically. I don't think they use the word demonic, right? Because they're all demonic. But they were warning Eisenhower never to enter into a covenant with the Greys. Well, they were the good guys. The Greys were the bad guys. This is fascinating because if you fast forward into this idea of a coming deception, they had to already set the groundwork to create a good alien, bad alien, good cop, bad cop. Because what we're dealing with here is a bunch of liars. Satan's a liar. His demons are liars. That's why when someone starts playing with a Ouija board, their grandmother starts talking to them. Well, it's not your grandmother, bro. Yeah. That's a demon. Yeah. That's an entity who wants to deceive you. Sure. They want to steal, to kill, and to destroy. That's biblical. And we're also told as Christians, we got to be vigilant and we got to be sober-minded because Satan is our adversary. And the name Satan isn't really a name. We have this misconception that Satan, the devil, the red pitchfork, and in reality, Ha-Satan is the enemy, the adversary. And so when we say Satan, it could actually be referring to the whole team of demons and entities, fallen angels. And so what we have is we have the fallen angels. And now it's my personal belief. Let me just lay this out real quick. It's my personal belief based on the book of Revelation and based on me using a calculator and understanding some definitions. I was able to calculate that if a third of the angels fell with Lucifer, with Satan, the Satan, right? If a third of them fell with him, and that's also based on another passage of a third of the stars getting knocked down to earth. If that passage means what we think it means, and if we understand it correctly, a third of the angels fell with Satan. And you can do your math and figure out that equals somewhere between 30 to 50 plus million fallen angels on the surface of the earth. Now, out of that, some of them were put in chains. The Bible tells us this because the ones that committed sexual sin, the Genesis 6, they have been locked up in chains. We can read about this in Jude. But the ones that are not locked in chains, just think about it, 30 to 50 plus million fallen angels on the face of the earth. I made the comment recently in an interview I did that is more than the population of the largest state in America.
I mean, these are the gods of the nations. These are the ones who have been worshipped throughout time. These are the ones of the nations who they set up the groves and the high places and offered sacrifices to them. They've been presenting themselves to humanity throughout time under different names, but under the same descriptions of their characteristics. So when you look at it in those kind of terms, and to also answer your question about are they otherworldly or interdimensional, through the document 6751, we did find that back in the 40s even, they were saying that they were interdimensional beings. Wow. So that will parallel with what Scripture has to say of fallen angels. With Job, for instance, you have Job, and this kind of is a crossover between our first film, Hollow Earth Chronicles, and the latest Higher Entities. But in Job, you have, now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. And the Lord said unto Satan, Whence comest thou? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. So on one hand, you have him being able to present himself before the Lord, but he also is able to, and that's the spiritual realm. That's the things that we can't access. There's a barrier that's been put in place. But Satan and these divine beings, with the divine council, they were able to hold an audience before the Lord. At the same time, Satan says here that he's allowed, or that he's been going to and fro in the earth and walking up and down in it. So that's an interdimensional feat.
And by the way, Tom Horn, his brother-in-law, was murdered. He worked at Los Alamos. This was the first time he ever told the story publicly. He never spoke this story publicly. Matter of fact, he told his sister that he would not disclose the full story while she was still alive. Yet here he is. He worked it out to tell us the story in our film. His brother-in-law worked for Los Alamos. And interestingly, he married Tom's sister, who had alien encounters from the time she was about 13 years old. Not only did she suffer alien visitations and paralysis as a child, her daughter, the next generation, when she entered into that age of puberty, she began to get attacked. And then her husband, this is where it gets crazy. He comes home one day. They start drinking, knocking back a few. One thing leads to another, which I found out a lot of times when people start drinking, they're able to pull things out of the recesses that they would never talk about. So many stories of alien abductions and demonic activity people are willing to talk about after they have a few drinks. Things that are in those deep recesses come out. Now, I'm not saying that to recommend or to I'm just saying that a lot of the stories we find out about in our research comes from one guy having a few drinks, and then it just starts coming out. Wow. It's like the filter's gone. Long story short, and we give the full story in Higher Entities. It's a great story. Not great as in good, but it's very fascinating. He comes home, he and the wife start drinking, and she decides she's going to share some of her childhood history with him that he didn't know about. And if I remember correctly how it all went down, he comes out and says, well, this is crazy because we're actually working with this type of stuff at Los Alamos. Now, he gives her information that we don't know, but he disclosed to her what he was doing in the alien base, that the conspiracy theorists call an alien base. But now it doesn't really seem like a conspiracy theory anymore, because if it was just a theory, why would he have been killed 24 hours later? 24 hours after he shares what they were doing at Los Alamos, he disappears. No body found, nothing. They say that they've never seen him back in the offices, So she reaches out and she's like, where's my husband never came home from work. He left for work. He left our house. He drove, he went to Los Alamos, but he never came home. Well, she now wants to get her benefits just to help pay for, for all the expenses that he was bringing in money. He's no longer there, and he's been working hard. There's pension and guarantees that she's supposed to get. They won't give her anything because there's no body. Without a body, there's no death certificate. Without a death certificate, there's no benefits. So she, working for the federal government as well, she starts rattling the cage high up, and finally, once she starts dropping information that's putting fear in people, they, in order to shut her up, finally say, okay, you know what, here you go, here's your benefits, done. Now, that tells me that it's not a conspiracy theory, that there's actual fact to this. There's alien activity, demonic activity going on at Los Alamos, and it was so serious that they would have had his house bugged, and that they were tracking every discussion he had in that house. And that was the thing, was he was working in the DUM, the Deep Underground Military Base. From my understanding, he was working there, and he told her what he was working on. Wow. We don't even know what that was. That's what's so fascinating about this story, is that we don't even know what he disclosed, but it was something so serious that 24 hours later, he's dead. Again, we're dealing with the fallout of what took place at the Babylon Working. Babylon Working changed everything. I believe that was prophetic on the satanic timeline. That was a big deal. And so I do believe for a fact that Roswell was just another byproduct. And I also believe, based on another FBI document that we have in our stack of over 300, is that there were more than one craft. And I believe, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I want to say there was possibly 9 bodies according to one declassified document. This is going to lead us right into Ray Boucher. Ray Boucher is now bringing all of this current. We're no longer dealing with 1940s or 50s or 60s. We're dealing with our lifetime, and this is where it just hits home. Ray Boucher is an ordained minister. He has been a Baptist minister, a Lutheran minister, and he's also known as a Lutheran exorcist. we're very particular about who we work with and who we yoke up with in ministry. And after talking with Ray and looking into him, he is extremely biblically sound. His theology is right in line with Scripture on all the majors that would matter. And so we did some homework on this guy. Tom Horn, Derek Gilbert, goodness, everybody that we talked to, people that I'm not even going to name, people that we talked to off the record, everybody kept saying, including Darren Geisinger and Chad Riley, they all said, you got to talk to Ray Boucher. They said he was met with by 2 members of the Department of Defense because of his unique background as a minister, as an exorcist, and as the head of MUFON for his state, which is Nebraska. Wow. This is a guy who was heavily involved in the UFO community back before the internet was a thing. He would go to these meetings, he would read up. I mean, back then it was like a videotape was like $60, like a documentary videotape. You pay $60. I mean, these were the days before the internet, before YouTube. Information was harder to get. But Ray Boucher was heavily involved in the UFO community back in the day. And so being the head of MUFON and also for his state, and also for being a minister and an exorcist and a UFO advocate, a UFO truth advocate, these 2 men contact him from the DOD and they say, we really need to meet with you because of your unique standing. We need to meet with you and we need your, basically we need you to consult with us about what some of this may be. So he met secretly with these members of the Department of Defense, and they told him that they were part of a non-existent group inside the DOD working on government facilities paid for by taxpayer dollars, and that they began to try to get answers to some of this stuff, and they began to engage in occult rituals to communicate with these entities. Now let me explain this. If you don't feel like this is just a reoccurrence of the Collins elite, I mean, this is recent. This is happening in the modern time period. He says that their bigger group was engaging in what he called satanic rituals, and he even said that the DOD contacts hinted at human sacrifice being done on the taxpayer dollar behind closed doors on government facilities. He said they started off with, we just want to get answers. And he says, and that turned into a we can do better mentality. We can do more than this. We can go above and beyond. This is the same story you see when you're watching movies about famous drug dealers. Oh, we can do better mentality. Starts off, they're just selling a little dope. And before you know it, they're a kingpin and they just want more and more and more. It's not that they need it anymore, but it's that we can do better mentality. We can't leave well enough alone. To quote Karate Kid, we cannot leave well enough alone, and we can do better, and we're going to do better, and we're going to get more technology, we're going to get more information, we're going to get more power, and we're going to rise up by the power of the entities. And so Ray Boucher explained to them that yes, this stuff was extremely demonic, that yes, y'all had a good idea. Basically, your instincts were correct. This is demonic and you don't need to be doing it. They knew that was the case, but they needed someone they could talk to, such as Ray Boucher with his unique background. And so he was able to meet with them. And I believe they met twice. They had some phone conversations. But the thing is Ray wouldn't meet with us originally. He didn't want to talk to anybody. He's a very friendly guy. He was willing to just be cordial and hello, nice to meet you. But when we told him we wanted him on camera and that we wanted to meet with him, it was like, well, I could probably work with you guys at some point. He says, but I'm really busy. It's kind of like the nice way of saying, sorry, can't help you. We continued to try to reach out to him. We began our investigation. We talked with Tom Horn and Derek Gilbert and these others. Derek Gilbert told us to go listen to an interview he did with a podcast. Dr. Future, I think, was the name of the show. And we listened to it. And at the very beginning of the podcast, the guy says, wow, we've been trying to schedule this with you for over a year, and you're finally coming on to talk with us. So I imagine Ray Boucher is extremely careful. He's very standoffish. He wants to protect his family. He doesn't want to get involved in something he shouldn't be. And so I just kind of wrote it off that he's not going to meet with us. And we're probably going to have to just go ahead and end this project early. He finally comes through and says, okay, I'll do it. But I'm not going to tell you where we're going to meet or what time we're going to meet. He says, plan on coming down and getting a hotel in the big city close by. So we did. We went down. We got a hotel in the big city. And it was a big city, by the way. This city was booming and busy. I mean, crazy busy the whole time we were there. We didn't know until the morning of what time we were going to meet and the fact that he was going to come to us at our hotel room. That's how secretive he is. And just to add a little bit of mystery to the situation, shortly after we got done releasing this film, I get word that Ray Boucher has been diagnosed with some strange, rare kind of cancer. So I say that to ask people to be praying for him. One of the bonus nuggets that we released in Higher Entities was there was a guy who had very high security clearance. I believe it was a lieutenant colonel. I forget. Chad Riley knows it was his contact. It wasn't our contact. And by the way, let me just give a quick shout out to Chad Riley. He's the guy who fishes up these documents that nobody's ever heard of.
Nice.
Like, we are blessed to have people are like, how do you even get some of this information? Well, we've got a guy on our team named Chad Riley, and he has a skill to where he fishes up these rare documents from the FBI vault that nobody's ever heard of. And so it's a blessing to have him on board, and he's also our co-producer. So having Chad on board, because somebody's going to wonder, how did you find document 6751? It was downloaded. You can only download it, like, if you don't know how to find it, you got to download it in a thick packet called the UFO packet #1, which, by the way, is available on the FBI vault. The same FBI vault where they admitted that Hitler was alive in Argentina after World War II.
Yep.
People ask where we got that document that we showed in the Hollow Earth Chronicles. Well, we got it from the FBI. While I was doing an interview with Gon Shimura on Face Like the Sun YouTube channel, he goes to pull up the document. His IP address is blocked from accessing that document. He had to go in and change his settings live on the recording that we did. He had to change his browser settings just to access 6751. Now, I don't want to digress. This is so important. We're dealing with this idea of government agencies doing anything it takes to keep you from getting the Easter egg.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it is. They're trying to hide their Easter eggs. And so what happened here was Chad's contact, his name is Greg Renrich. He has the above top secret clearance, areas such as Groom Lake, Area 51, a list. Chad breaks down the whole list in Higher Entities. And so Chad was in contact with him through our other mutual contact, Kay Carswell, who's a dear friend of ours. Kay has become friends with Greg Renrich. They've interviewed him. I don't know if they've interviewed him publicly or just private, but he started to give Chad all this information that we were going to include in our film. And so the information was unbelievable, and I'll give that information away here in a second, but I want to just say he was supposed to be in our film. At some point, he just decides he's going to just fall off the face of the earth and back out. And so we're trying to get answers, like what's going on with Greg Renrich. I mean, he was a prime interview. We needed him. This guy has been down in the underground bases with the entities. See, Stan Deyo didn't work directly with entities. His colleagues worked with the entities.
Wow.
So Stan's was hearsay, trustworthy hearsay, but he didn't work with the entities. This guy, Greg Renrich, worked in the base with entities that called themselves the Nephilim. They were 9-10 feet tall entities, and they told him that they were preparing for an intergalactic war with God, and that they were going to win. They believed they were going to win. Furthermore, Greg Renrich is on record saying that he had to sign an affidavit before he could go in this facility, that he wouldn't even use the name Jesus, even as a cuss word, in this deep underground military base. And this goes right back to what Joe Jordan says, is that hundreds of cases of alien abduction completely halted at the name of Jesus being proclaimed. Even if he stubbed his toe as a cuss word, he couldn't say Jesus.
I'll go back to the quote from Aleister Crowley. We mentioned this in the film. But he says that today we're calling them angels and demons. Tomorrow we'll call them something else. So we could, in the world standards, we can call them aliens. In the world standards, we can call them ascended masters, light beings, give them a name. But scripturally, I'll go back to the same beings that were depicted in Genesis 6, but even more so, fine-tuning it to the Table of Nations. What happened at Babel was God, he disinherited the nations, and he accounted them, he allotted them to the number of the sons of God.
It's kind of similar to what the Freemasons believe. When you work your way up into Freemasonry, you believe that it's compatible with your faith. And in reality, it's really not compatible with anyone's faith. It's its own faith. But you don't know that at the lower levels. You know, it's a universalist group. You know, when you take that first initiation, you are agreeing that all paths lead to the great architect, you know, what they call God, the eye of providence. As you work your way up, I think it's the 28th degree, somewhere between the 28th and the 30th, if I remember correctly. I just had this conversation the other night with my buddy Brett, And you have this understanding that the Bible is good and it's the Word of God, but when you get to the 28th to the 30th degree, you find out that the role gets reversed, and that Lucifer was actually the underdog. He was the good God that really did all the good creation, that really did. He had the best, he had basically our best interest at heart. It's Gnosticism. And so Jesus, they believe, is the enemy. Yahweh is the enemy, that it's a reversal role, that the Bible, and this is part of the coded language that they use, is that you don't find this out until you're higher up. So it's like the reversing of roles. So even though Jesus has already died on the cross, he shed his blood on Calvary, and there's some really interesting things about his blood possibly going down to the Ark of the Covenant. Maybe another video we could talk about that. But Jesus died on Calvary. He descended into the heart of the earth, where he preached to the spirits in prison. This is all part of the Hollow Earth film we did. And then he rose. He defeated death. He rose from the dead. And he declared victory over every unclean spirit, over every imp of Satan, over every evil entity that would ever be in existence. He literally declared victory over. And their time is short. They know their time is short. Yet their goal is to try to do as much damage to the kingdom as they can. But what we know, according to Scripture, is that their work is in vain, because the cross defeated all of that. Now, let me add one last little thing here. Greg Renrich was out walking on his ranch, or his farm, his property, with his wife. And all of a sudden, they get this thing on the back of their neck, and they're kind of, wiping it. You ever, smash a bug or something, and you kind of, do one of these? So they get a slimy residue on the back of their neck. Well, it doesn't affect him the same way it affects his wife. And this is their property. This isn't like they're out in some random wooded lot. This is their land. They get back, and they've already had a horrible history. Ever since he started speaking out about his testimony, because he's a Christian, to the best of my knowledge, he began to share these stories publicly. And he had just a SWAT team show up at his house with machine guns, destroyed his family. The family relationships that they had tight bonds with are now, they've got a broken family over all this. People can't understand why he would have done anything to put their family at risk. They're like, why would you have done this? Why would you even talk about this? You have ruined this family. And so he doesn't even have good relationships with all of his family anymore, because of the high up non-existent government SWAT teams that are coming out to force him into submission. Anyway, that happened previously. Now, fast forward, they're walking on their land, and they get this slimy residue on the back of their neck. And so they get back home, and the wife is ill. I mean, it acted fast. So ill. Chad gave us an update. Chad contacted him, and we filmed the update in the film because we were waiting on him. We were kind of tracking along. He's not going to come on the film. His wife's not doing well. Matter of fact, Chad said in the film that he didn't know if his wife was actually going to make it through all of this. And it reminded me of the late J.C. Johnson, who was a friend of mine. He was a cryptozoologist, and he would take people on guided tours in the Four Corners area, where he would show people where these animals would show up. Like he says that they've seen pterodactyls. He says they've seen all kinds of crazy, what we could only call a hybrid or a prehistoric type. I don't believe in prehistoric time, but the idea of what we're told dinosaurs are, these strange animals, right? We're told that there's portals in the Four Corners where these things cross over, and the Indians don't want to go near it. And these wild animals, what we would call animals, they're these weird things that are coming through the portals. So J.C. Johnson would go out there with his, he'd take a security team with machine guns, like mercenary style, and they would give guided tours out there. People that wanted to go see this for themselves. And it was several times he would send me photos from their action cameras where they would pick up what looks like gray aliens in the bushes. Wow. Anyway, I'm bringing all this up because J.C. Johnson told me that he had friends that went down to Dulce to research. He said that they were getting a little too close to the fire. They got done doing their homework. They go back to their car. Well, what they didn't know is that before they got back to their car, there were men in black, these men in the shadows, that came and dusted some type of a biological weapon known as a transdermal on the handles of their car. So all they had to do was touch the handle. You touch it, it is now transdermal. It's going into your bloodstream immediately. And they become either really, really ill to the point where the rest of their life is spent in a bed, or they die. That's what I was reminded of when Greg Renrich, passed on the message that his wife was ill and that they had found some type of a slime on the back of their necks. I don't want to lose my life. because I've got so much love to give and I got so much, kingdom work to do. But I'm reminded of this passage in the Bible, and I don't have the address in my mind. I don't know where it is in the Bible, but there's a passage that talks about, don't fear those that can kill the body. Mm-hmm. You need to fear the one that owns your soul, the one that can take your soul, and that is the Almighty God. That is Yahweh, Jehovah, Jesus Christ. He's the only one that I fear. And so if someone were to take this body because of me doing a service to the kingdom, it just means more crowns and riches in the next life.
And Philippians 2:8, and I got that here. Wherefore God also hath highly exalted him, speaking of Christ, and given him a name which is above every name. So that's the authority. That at the name of Jesus every knee shall bow, every knee should bow, of things in heaven and things in earth and things under the earth, and that every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Mm-hmm. So just a couple things on that. First, it shows that that these places actually exist. So you've got things in heaven, things in earth, and things under the earth. Those are three physical locations, and we'll call them spiritual locations because we can't access the one or the other until we're completed. But it also shows, and most importantly, it shows that Jesus has all the authority. It's all been given to him because of what he's done. And so every tongue is going to confess at one point or another that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. He's been exalted above everything. Everything's under his authority. So there's nothing to fear. Thank God we've been given his word to study it, and I wish I would have started earlier, man. Like one of the things I tell people that are, earlier on their walks, I wish I would have started reading the scripture on a daily basis, because that's where our foundation comes from. That's the basic instruction before leaving earth. It's our map. He gave us this so we wouldn't be lost. It documents the whole story. And so there's nothing to fear. It's amazing. If we're in Christ, we're sealed until that day.
Amen. Mount Graham is considered one of the 4 holiest mountains in the world for the Apache, and is considered sacred to all of the region's native peoples, and it is so because it is what we might call a stargate. In their mythos, a portal through which the star people have come since the dawn of time. There's a dragon with the power of speech that turns up, bargaining with mankind, as well as supernatural gateways associated with mountains through which spirit beings have and can come. This is Dr. Thomas Horn, and you are watching End Times Productions. This was something that we heard about, and then we investigated during research for the book Exo Vaticana, which ultimately led us to the top of Mount Graham in Arizona. We were curious why. When the Vatican's Advanced Technology Telescope and the Large Binocular Telescope were being built, why did the indigenous peoples of Arizona, especially the San Carlos Apaches, why did they join environmentalists in filing dozens of lawsuits before a federal appeals court to try to stop the construction of the observations on Mount Graham? The project ultimately prevailed in favor of the Vatican and NASA after an act by the United States Congress ordered it to be done. But the question remained in our mind, why had the tribal communities fought so diligently against the construction of telescopes atop that mountain? Now, I had wrongly assumed that this was because Mount Graham was a sacred place, as in preceding generations of Native Americans had lived and died on it, and therefore it was considered holy ground, something like a graveyard. But I learned later that while that was partially true, it really wasn't the big issue. The real dispute surrounded how Mount Graham is considered one of the 4 holiest mountains in the world for the Apache, and is considered sacred to all of the region's native peoples, and it is so because it is what we might call a stargate. In their mythos, a portal through which the star people have come since the dawn of time. And once we understood that fact, our suspicions as to why the Vatican and NASA had chosen that mountain in particular, even being willing to face a prolonged legal battle to build these telescopes on Mount Graham, including the largest binocular telescope in the world where the Lucifer device is kept, why would they have gone to all of that trouble? Why not just go to another mountain range and find basically the same height, the same environmental conditions? Why did it have to be that mountain? Now, we came to learn another thing, and that is that the San Carlos Apache have these preserved ancient tales concerning Mount Graham and that geography, including stories very similar to biblical chronology. These legends involve a creator, a deceiving dragon that follows, an epic flood, and even a race of giants known as the Jindupids, who were judged and destroyed by God. According to the legend, a race of Indians called the Tartans lived in the valley between Tucson and Phoenix. These were just peaceful farmers, and they prospered until one day they were invaded by the Jindupids, described as Goliaths, who were so huge they used tree limbs for toothpicks. Well, these Nephilim were led by this massive man they call Evilkin, who allegedly came from the northeast and were headed south to their home beyond the Gulf of Baja. These giants nearly wiped out the Tartans before they ran and hid themselves underground and in the mountains and prayed to Father Sun, who then threw this huge fireball that came down to the earth, seared the monstrous Nephilim into the scorched mountain rock, and wiped them out. Now, elements of that tale are obviously mythological, but it has a remarkable thematic coherence with Genesis chapter 6. The Apache creation myth is also interesting in this regard, as a particular version involves what they call the one who lives above, who descended down over the mountain in a flying disc at the start of creation. Their myth begins, in the beginning, nothing existed, no earth, no sky, no sun, no moon, only darkness was everywhere. And then the legend starts, before noting that suddenly from the darkness emerged a disc. One side of it was yellow, the other side of it was white. It appeared suspended in midair, and within the disc sat a bearded man, the creator, the one who lives above. Now, besides this creator who rides in a heavenly disc, there's a dragon with the power of speech that turns up, bargaining with mankind, as well as supernatural gateways associated with mountains through which spirit beings have and can come. So suffice it to say that these ancient native ideas involving flying discs, flying creators, spirit guides, even owls and a talking dragon or a great serpent, and supernatural gateways tied to mountain ranges. This is something that began long before the Vatican cast its eyes on Mount Graham. Think how much these legends mirror what the Bible teaches, including the idea that mountaintops or high towers were often depicted as places where doorways into the supernatural could be opened. For instance, Nimrod of biblical fame sets out to build a tower whose top will reach into heaven, Genesis 11:4 says. This was the infamous Tower of Babel, and Nimrod was designing it so that the top of it would extend into Shamayim, heaven, the dwelling place of God. The Jewish Encyclopedia confirms several historical records that Nimrod, who it establishes was also identified by various ancient cultures as Osiris, Orion, Apollo, Gilgamesh, that he had built the Tower of Babel specifically to ascend into the presence of God, into the presence of Jehovah himself. And of course, God came down and said of the tower's design that nothing would be restrained from them which they have imagined to do, Genesis 11:6. So in other words, according to the Lord himself, Nimrod would have accomplished what he imagined to do, and that is to build a tower whose top would reach into the abode of God. Even the name Babylon implies that, echoing the North and South American Indian beliefs about towering gateways and the meaning gate of God or gateway to God. Now, that there could be sacred locations where those beings that can see into the supernatural realm could literally walk onto a high place and enter heaven is really not as far-fetched as it sounds. There are numerous records, including in the Bible, that appear to substantiate the idea that heaven can be attained on high towers or mountainous locations. So think about Moses meeting with God on Sinai, Jesus returning atop the Mount of Olives, the 200 watchers that descended in the days of Jared on the summit of Mount Hermon, and other examples, including Jacob's ladder.
So I said, oh, you're talking about the skinwalkers. And I mean, immediately, everybody in the whole establishment just stopped talking. And it just got quiet. And they immediately began to pray and started rebuking what I just said in Jesus' name. And apparently on the reservation, you're not supposed to use the name Skinwalker or anything like that because it invokes them and they will come seek you out. My name is Chad Riley. I'm a producer at Fourth Watch Films and part of Fall Bros Productions. I'm very proud of that, and it's very humbling to be a part of the team. What's going on out there at Skinwalker Ranch. The ranch was actually purchased by a family that lived there for a couple of years. While this family was living there, they started having a lot of supernatural encounters. In fact, when they moved in, it looked like the house was set up, there was locks on the outside and on the inside of the house, which kind of set off their radar.
Locks on the inside
and on the outside. It was very bizarre. And there was manifestations. There was all sorts of cryptids that were popping up. They kept seeing lights that would just appear out of nowhere. There was quite a few scary incidents that they had. One of the most, I guess the one that really shook them the most was the gigantic wolf that kept appearing. And this wasn't a normal sized wolf. I mean, they said this thing was bigger than a moose. It was humongous. And in fact, the kids were fascinated with it. They ran up and wanted to start playing with it. And the father and the mother were like literally having a heart attack. And while this was going on, it all of a sudden ran over and attacked one of the cows that was in a pen. It literally reached over, grabbed a cow, a baby cow, and basically started eating it in front of the entire family. Finally, the family moved away and they sold the house to Robert Bigelow Aerospace. In fact, all the UFO reports that are generated in the United States, pretty much worldwide, all go to Bigelow. He has been following the whole UFO supernatural thing for a very long time. In fact, his family had a UFO encounter. They were out in the middle of nowhere and they saw a light, and next thing they knew, it flew up right in front of the windshield of their car. And they said that all of a sudden, after it sat there for a few seconds, it just shot off at a 45-degree angle and just vanished. So I believe it was the family talking about that incident that set him on his way, because, I mean, he's not just a typical person. He's a billionaire. And this guy spends millions of dollars on research. And like I said, he's got his own aerospace company. But he has gone on 60 Minutes and said, we don't have to go looking for ET. He's already here. And like I said, that ties in with what's going on out there at Skinwalker Ranch. In fact, he actually allowed the CIA to come set up out there for 10 years and do research after he purchased the farm from the family that no longer wanted to live there. So they've been doing research out there for a very long time. They know that there's something out there. In fact, one of the researchers that worked out there has recently gone on with John Greenwald Jr. on the Black Vault and did an interview with him and came right out and said that They basically were told to do whatever it took to make contact with the entities that were out there. And that included Ouija boards, that included putting out offerings and various other things. In fact, they said that whenever they were doing the Ouija board, the planchette actually levitated off the board and flew across the room and was hitting them in the chest. The scientists said whenever they would leave these offerings out there at Skinwalker Ranch, after about the 3 days, the offering would disappear and that these things began to manifest. So there is something about this. Don't recommend anybody I hear people talking all the time that, I go out there with good thoughts and I want to meet Bigfoot or this and that, and people have encounters, and like I said, it doesn't turn out the way they want it to, but at the same time, you are invoking this stuff by going out there and doing that and being in that frame of mind. You got to keep in mind that cryptids definitely fall into a lot of the supernatural stuff. I mean, you got this with even people like David Paulides, who does the Missing 411, that they have a lot of encounters with like Bigfoot. People seeing not just Bigfoot, but, other cryptids as well. But like I said, a lot of the stuff where the weird and people go vanishing and different things like that, people seeing lights in the skies. I don't know if they're being taken interdimensional, or if this is something to do with underground, because that's another thing. If you look at a lot of the locations, the hot spots where people are vanishing, there's also entrances into cave systems close by. So that's another factor. So, is this hollow earth? One of the things that you'll hear about as far as hollow earth, Admiral Byrd is one that pops up a lot. Okay, well, Admiral Byrd has a nephew named Harvey Byrd. Harvey Byrd did the foreword for the book Stranger at the Pentagon, who happens to be about an alien named called Valiant Thor who came to Earth. From 1957, there was a spacecraft that landed not too far from the Pentagon, about 14 miles away. Police showed up at the scene. There was a man standing there, and basically they escorted him over to the Pentagon. This man, or this entity, I should say, was here for about 3 years living at the Pentagon and working with the U.S. government. His name was Valiant Thor. Now, this is where it gets weird, because Phil Snyder's dad worked alongside Valiant Thor. And not only did he work with him, he also worked in a lot of the UFO stuff as well as exotic space materials. Now, after his dad passed away, this stuff was found in his father's attic or whatever, and he was going through it and with a couple of his friends, and they started looking into this. But Phil Snyder had already had his encounter because he worked as a geologist at the location that you were talking about, which is the Dulce location. And through me talking with Greg Renrich, that designation for the Dulce location is called S20. So just like Area 51 has S4, they all have different designations, but the one at Dulce is designated as S20. And while he was there, they were basically tunneling, building an area for an underground military base, and they actually punched through something. Now, what Phil Snyder used to say, or what he claimed, was that they knew these entities were already there. That's one of the things that aggravated and irritated him the most, was that the government knew they were there, and they allowed them to go work that in such close proximity. So when they broke through and they went down to see what was wrong with the machine that was tunneling, when they got down there, they encountered these 12-foot tall grays. And Phil said that as soon as they saw them, they unholstered the weapons and they began firing. And he said that one of the entities literally threw its hand up in front of his chest like this, and he said, all I saw was a blue beam. Next thing I know, I was laying on the ground. It burned his feet, had a big scar on his chest where it basically opened him up like a fish and took some of his fingers off. That was his encounter at the Dulce location.
What is on this tape?
The truth about our government's involvement in a global conspiracy of silence about the existence of extraterrestrial life.
The world's full of these deep underground military bases that are paid for by black money. Of course, there's the Magneto-Leviton trains that are connecting them all, and he tried to warn people and got killed. And men's hearts will fail them for what they see coming upon the earth. I'm Darren Geisinger, and you're watching End Times Productions. And And I feel like the humanity, they're going to melt it all down. Just-in-time shipping. No one knowing how to grow anything or make anything anymore. It's all building this house of cards really, really tall. They're going to pull out the bottom card. They're going to let the cities depopulate themselves. They're going to reduce the population back, just like the Georgia Guidestones mentioned. They're going to let all of that happen, and they're going to birth this out of our desperation. And when our moment of need, when we're hungry, when we're dying, make no mistake that the earth cracks open. Smoke and things come out. I think that people are going to be at a state in the pre-flood stage, when people's thoughts were full of evil all the time. I think that we're going to get into a state where, especially if we take the carrot where we are upgraded, that type of a person who's taken this upgrade no longer has the ability to repent. If people wonder why the mark of the beast is an unforgivable sin, it's because A, Jesus was fully human, fully God. He died for full humans to pay the penalty for full humans. You are no longer under that. And when the book of Enoch and other books talk more specifically about the giants, it says there is no salvation for them. They're reprobate creations. They were never designed to exist. There's no ransom for them. When people become that, then in the future, if this happens, you can get a CRISPR genetic kit for $175 now on Amazon. So we're on the cusp of this. If they become something else, you might not be able to be saved just from that. But let's say you open yourself up to someone who can't repent anymore, and these things that have been restrained can fully occupy you. Well, you become evil continually then. And then add need and want into it, desperate times. You're talking about total chaos. I mean, yeah, I read stories of sailors who are abandoned at sea and in lifeboats, and it only takes a week and a half for them to be eating each other. And we're talking about hardened military men that are believers. And what are you looking at? Miami and Baltimore, St. Louis, LA. What are these inner cities going to do when they're used to living off Monster Energy drinks and ho-hos, and all of a sudden this whole thing is pulled out? What is that going to look like? So you add want and need onto altering ourselves into something else, and Christ said there has never been a time like it before and never will be again. And if the days were not shortened, there would be no flesh left alive. We're waiting for Jacob to give us that stew, and he won't yet until we give up our final. And I believe that when we do that, and we become less than human, and that starts to spread through the whole population, when we are no longer a majority of humans, we have given up our authority on planet Earth that the Heavenly Father has given us, and that's when the restrainer will be pulled off. We no longer have authority on this planet Earth, and men's hearts will fail them for what they see coming upon the earth. A very famous Satanist known as Aleister Crowley, and then his pseudo-student Jack Parsons, who was the founder of Jet Propulsion Laboratories. Those gentlemen were both into magical workings that could undoubtedly have led to opening our world to other entities that could come through. It seemed like at the times that they were doing these incantations that the UFO sightings burgeoned, it took off. And so that's where our own government started creating programs to try to handle all these sightings and deal with it. It seemed like the evidence was supremely there that it looked demonic. It looked like an invasion, but yet as some very powerful groups were trying to push that warning, other more powerful groups were pushing the ET solution, that they were indeed superior beings visiting from other worlds. So talk about a subject that churches like to avoid, UFOs, abductions. What does that mean? And are they really from other worlds? What does an ET mean? Demons are the disembodied spirits of the giants that died in the flood. And they are our great nemesis. There is no doubt about it. Unclean spirits and demons haunt us. And as the Apostle Paul said, we fight against them. And I have cast away an unclean spirit twice with sleep paralysis, using the name of Jesus, barely being able to get it out of my mouth after a couple minutes, and it stopped immediately. Truth, and people should cling to it. That is powerful. We're in an all-out war, and so I think that people need to come away from this interview or wherever you're at more armed, more equipped. Do not fear.